Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at an experimental Swedish rifle. This is a conversion of the Swedish AG-42B Ljungman from 6.5 by 55 to 7.62 NATO. Now, this rifle is referenced in a few places as a model FM59. In fact, it's actually referenced that way on a guest article on my own website. But looking at this now, I don't think that's actually an accurate date. I think this conversion work had to be done basically in 1954, because we know that in 54, the Swedes were also experimenting with a paratrooper version of that, which is this guy, which we'll cover in a separate video, but it uses the exact same gas conversion system that this one does. So 54, maybe 1955, the dates have to line up such that this rifle has all of the updates to the AG-42B, and that was a program that was started in 1953. So it has to be post-53. It also has to be post-actual development and adoption of the 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO cartridge, which would put it 1954. Late 54 is when the first FN FALs are adopted in 7.62 NATO. By 55, a bunch of countries are starting to adopt it. So that 54-55 timeline fits with the early availability of 7.62 NATO. It's important to point out here, Sweden was not a member of NATO. In fact, Sweden hasn't been a member of NATO until just the last year or so. But in the 1950s, Sweden is looking at new military equipment. They want to get an automatic rifle, a select fire rifle, to replace the AG-42s. And they're looking at what are their options in this wide world of military equipment. Nobody else is really using 6.5 Swedish, and it makes sense. They want to be more aligned with the West than with Russia, or more aligned with the West than completely independent on their own in case World War III happens to break out. So the Swedes are looking at 7.62 NATO, and this is their attempt to convert the Ljungmans. So let's take a closer look at this, because they actually got rid of the most characteristic element of the Ljungman, which is its direct gas impingement system. All right, the back end of this rifle is completely normal. It's a regular AG-42B Ljungman. It gets weird when we go past the rear sight. So let's start with the markings. All right, so we have a 1945 production date. That's appropriate. Like the last 30% or so of Ljungman receivers were manufactured in 1945. That Crown C is the Carl Gustaf's mark on it. What's a little bit weird here is we have this 300 that's clearly stamped after the receiver has been blued. And it seems pretty obvious to me that they didn't grind off an original serial number. Originally, there would have been a serial number right down here. So I suspect this rifle was manufactured using a spare receiver that was still at Carl Gustaf. So when it was manufactured, these markings were put on, and it would have gotten its serial number when it was assembled. Instead, it gets 300 I and A, and there's an I up here on the bolt as well. These, I can't tell you the exact meaning of. I don't think in fact, I'm pretty sure they didn't make 300 of these conversions. It is possible that this is a bore diameter, that this is simply being marked 300 as in 30 caliber instead of 6.5 millimeter, but I don't know what the I or the A mean. Moving forward, the upper handguard on the rifle has been ditched, and instead we have this sheet metal upper. It is helpfully marked framåt here with an arrow, and that's just because this is pretty close to a symmetrical upper heat shield, and framåt just means front. So that just tells you how to assemble the thing. We have a big old flash hider added on to the end here, reminiscent of the FAL heavy barrel or perhaps the FN mag. And then the most significant element here is that they have replaced the very simple original Ljungman gas block, which was just a gas port running into a direct impingement tube. They've replaced that with an adjustable gas port and a short stroke piston. In order to show you that, I need to take the stock off the rifle, so we'll take out the screws and the trigger guard. All right, there we go. Pull this out, and we pull the nose cap off, and now we can take this out of the barrel. I want to point out, before we go any farther, it's interesting that what used to be the front barrel band on the Ljungman, they've just clipped it off, crimped it down, and it does nothing now except just to hold its own barrel band spring in place. All right, But now that we have this off, we can take this sheet metal cover, and it's just held on by a pair of spring clips. So that can lift off. There's nothing inside it, just a cover to go over a new short stroke gas piston. So up at the front here, we have an adjustable screw. So this is going to cover over part of the gas port. The gas port's going to be right under that screw. So you can see this, when it's fully in place, covers over half of that hole. As you unscrew this, it's going to open the gas port up bit by bit until the gas port's fully open. So that's the adjustment screw. Then when you fire, gas comes up through here, and it's going to push back this piston. So then up here on the receiver, the original Ljungmans had a protruding basically bit of gas tube that was about 1/4 inch long. They've milled that away and instead have the short stroke piston coming through there now. So that just hits on the bolt carrier and causes it to open. So I can pull this back. This is weirdly, this is actually a single piece piston. So I can pull it back here far enough to release it, and it comes out. So it's a one-piece piston and op rod here. Normally with short stroke pistons like this, you'll have 2 or 3 pieces so that they're easier to assemble and work with. The Swedes knew about that. Like the G-43 had a simpler multi-part piston, but the Swedes didn't copy it. And then we have 2 recoil springs on the piston itself, connected by this splice in the middle. I can't really figure out what this is for. It's possible that it was something in an earlier iteration of this gun. This is very much experimental, so maybe this is just a holdover from some feature that we're not seeing. It doesn't act as an over travel stop. This spring fully compresses before this runs into the rear mounting point for the piston. So I don't know what exactly that's intending to do, but that's the whole gas system disassembled. It's really pretty simple. Now, in theory, the literature says that this conversion was done because 7.62 NATO was a higher pressure round than 6.5 Swedish, and thus the original gas impingement system wasn't suitable for the new heavier cartridge. I'm pretty sure that's not technically true, because we would see the Egyptians manufacture a basically straight up copy, licensed copy of the Ljungman in 8mm Mauser, and like if they can handle it in 8mm Mauser with direct impingement, which they did, although they did include an adjustable gas port on it, but if they could do it with 8 Mauser, you could definitely do it with 7.62 NATO. Now, the Egyptians did move that gas port a bit, so maybe this is done to account for the difference, like so they can use the same gas port in the barrel, and having, they can't move the port, so they can't adjust for different port pressures that way. Maybe that's part of the explanation. Ultimately, this isn't a system that ultimately works out for them because it's not fully adopted. There is no major push to actually convert Ljungmans to 7.62 NATO. Of course, Sweden didn't join NATO until long after they stopped using the Ljungman anyway. According to the information that I have, 10 examples of this conversion were actually manufactured. Of those, 3 are in the United States. And we know those fairly well because they're actually imported in the 1990s and sold by Circa. The other 7 remain in Europe. So there are some slight differences in them. In fact, the article on my own website, which is one of the American ones, has a couple little tiny differences, like the American muzzle device is actually clamped on with an Allen head screw. This one is threaded onto the muzzle. So there's a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of change. That makes sense for what is literally a prototype series of rifles. So we will talk about the further Swedish iterations and developments of the AG-42 Ljungman in a coming series of videos. Hopefully you enjoyed this look at the attempt to convert to the standard NATO cartridge. Thanks for watching.